1 week ago, Donald Trump stood in the cross hall of the White House and addressed the entire nation in a rare primetime speech about a war most Americans didn't ask for and still don't fully understand. He called it Operation Epic Fury. He claimed Iran's navy was gone, their air force in ruins, their leaders dead. He said the war would be over very shortly, and then, in the very same speech, he threatened to bomb them back to the Stone Ages over the next 2 to 3 weeks. So, which is it? Is the war almost over, or is it about to get worse? That speech was 1 week ago. In the 7 days since, we've had a civilization-ending threat, a 90-minute ceasefire scramble, Pakistan brokering a last-second deal, and missiles still flying after the ceasefire was signed. I'm going to break down everything Trump said, what he didn't say, what it all means, and why the gap between his words and reality is the most dangerous place in geopolitics right now. Let's go first. Why did Trump even give this speech on April 1st? Because the timing tells you everything. Trump addressed the nation on Wednesday night, offering an update on the war in Iran. During his first primetime speech since launching strikes alongside Israel more than a month ago. With the speech, Trump was getting a wide audience to articulate clear objectives for the war that could attempt to reconcile weeks of changing goals and often contradictory messages about whether he's winding down or ready to escalate military operations. That's the key phrase, reconcile weeks of changing goals. This speech wasn't a victory lap, it was damage control. Because here's the political reality Trump was walking into. Trump has been under growing pressure to end the war. That has been pushing up the cost of gasoline, food, and other goods. Gas prices surged more than 30% to top for dollars per gallon for the first time in more than 3 years. Oil prices, meanwhile, hovered around $100 per barrel. And his numbers? Even among Republican supporters of the president, his approval rating has dipped. A CNN poll showed that Republicans who strongly approve of Trump's job performance dropped to 43%, compared with 52% in January. So Trump walks into that cross hall, cabinet members seated behind him. Vance, Rubio, Hegseth, Leavitt. And he tries to give America a reason to believe this is all worth it. Let's go through what Trump said word by word because the rhetoric here is extraordinary. Trump opened with, "As we speak this evening, it's been just 1 month since the United States military began Operation Epic Fury, targeting the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran. In these past 4 weeks, our armed forces have delivered swift, decisive, overwhelming victories on the battlefield. Victories like few people have ever seen before. Tonight, Iran's navy is gone. Their air force is in ruins. Their leaders, most of them, terrorist regime they led, are now dead. That is one of the most sweeping victory declarations any president has ever made on live television. Iran's navy gone. Their air force in ruins. Their leaders dead. But then came the contradiction that everyone in the room had to sit with. We are going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We are going to bring them back to the Stone Ages, where they belong, Trump said. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing. Wait, stop. If you've already won, if Iran's military is destroyed, their leaders dead, their missiles gone, why do you need 2 to 3 more weeks of the hardest bombing you've ever done? PBS correspondent Nick Schifrin captured this perfectly. This was a case for war on day 33 of the war, rather than the day before the war. Most presidents have given this speech before launching the war. Think about what that means. A month into the conflict, Trump was still making the argument for why it was necessary. That's not a victory speech. That's a justification speech. here's where it gets complicated, because throughout this war, the stated goals have kept shifting. PBS analyst Liz Landers noted, the president laid out the reasons he thought it was necessary to make sure Iran would never have a nuclear weapon, and ran through objectives including eliminating their navy, hurting their air force, getting rid of their defense industrial base. But in that portion, we did not hear the president speak to the imminency of the Iranian threat, which is something that has fluctuated somewhat when the president has talked about this in the last few weeks. And then there's the question of regime change, which Trump addressed in the most unusual way possible. Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change. But regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death. They're all dead, Trump said. So, not the goal. But also, it happened. And Trump is fine with that. Trump also compared U.S. involvement in the war with Iran to other conflicts in modern history, trying to convince skeptical Americans to think of the war as an investment in the future. An investment in a war the polls show most Americans oppose. And on the Strait of Hormuz, the economic core of the crisis, Trump actually signaled something that shocked energy markets. Trump downplayed the impact, insisting that the U.S. did not need the strait, and signaling that he was willing to end the war without restoring access to the waterway. Oil traders heard that and sent prices surging for % higher immediately after the speech. Now, what was Iran saying and doing during all of this? Hours before Trump's address, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian posted a lengthy letter in English on his X account, appealing to U.S. citizens and stressing that his country had pursued negotiations before the U.S. launched strikes. And Iran's foreign minister made the stakes crystal clear. You cannot speak to the people of Iran in the language of threats and deadlines. We do not set any deadline for defending ourselves, Aragki said. Trump, meanwhile, claimed that Iran had asked for a ceasefire, something Iran denied loudly and immediately. A spokesperson for Iran's president said, the position of the Islamic Republic of Iran regarding national defense of the country's integrity against the aggression of enemies has not changed, and no attention is given to the delusions and falsehoods of criminals. And here's where the disinformation angle of this story gets really interesting. Trump referred in a Truth Social post to Iran's new regime president as requesting a ceasefire. Iran does not have a new president. Masoud Pezeshkian has been president since 2024. Iranian officials accused Washington of fabricating reports about diplomacy to manipulate the energy markets. Fabricating diplomacy to move oil markets. Think about the implications of that accusation. After Trump's speech, things escalated fast. The next several days saw Trump push harder and harder on the Hormuz deadline. And the rhetoric got darker with every post. Trump warned on social media that a whole civilization will die tonight if there was no deal between the two countries. A whole civilization will die tonight. Posted publicly by the sitting president of the United States. Democrats responded with calls for the 25th Amendment. Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted 25th Amendment. On X.Rep, Seth Moulton called it an impeachable offense. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump's instability is more clear and dangerous than ever. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Trump was asked whether he was concerned that potential strikes on civilian infrastructure, like bridges and power plants, would amount to war crimes under international law. Trump said he wasn't worried. And then, on Tuesday evening, with 90 minutes to spare, Pakistan pulled off the most dramatic diplomatic save of the decade. Let's put Trump's April 1st speech next to what actually happened over the following week. Because the gap between what he said and what unfolded is breathtaking. He said the war would end very shortly. 1 week later, missiles were still flying after a ceasefire was signed. He said Iran's military was destroyed. Iran kept launching drone and missile strikes through the deadline. He said discussions were ongoing. In his address on Wednesday, Trump did not mention diplomacy or negotiations at all, which analysts found notable. What caught my attention was the fact that he didn't say anything about the talks, if there are any. One expert observed. He said the Strait of Hormuz didn't matter. His entire ceasefire deal hinged on Iran reopening it. He said regime change wasn't the goal. Trump said the U.S. will work with Iran to dig up and remove buried uranium, a demand that implies total dominance over Iranian sovereignty. This is the pattern. The speech says one thing, reality says another, and the world, markets, allies, enemies, has to navigate the space in between. So what does all of this tell us about the next 2 weeks? The Islamabad talks are set to begin Friday, April 10th. Vice President Vance is likely to lead the U.S. delegation, with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner also expected to attend. But the foundation of those talks is shaky. Vance himself called this a fragile truce and said responses from Iran varied by faction, some cooperative, some actively lying about what had been accomplished. And the bigger question, nuclear weapons, remains completely unresolved. It remains unclear where negotiations stand regarding Iran's position on uranium enrichment. Trump's primetime speech gave America a vision of overwhelming victory. But the ceasefire that followed 1 week later, brokered not by the U.S., but by Pakistan with 90 minutes on the clock, tells a very different story. Here's the bottom line. When a president addresses the world in prime time, the words are supposed to clarify. But Trump's speech on April 1st did the opposite. It raised more questions than it answered, sent oil prices higher, and failed to mention the very negotiations that would define the next week of the war. The gap between what Trump says and what actually happens is not just a political story. It's a national security story. It's an economic story. And right now, with talks beginning Friday in Islamabad, it's the story that will determine whether the Middle East gets a lasting peace or just another countdown clock. Watch those talks. Watch the strait. Watch whether ships actually start moving. Because the speech was just the beginning. What happens next is everything. If this breakdown helped you, share it with someone who's trying to make sense of all of this. Subscribe, because we are going to stay on this story every single day. I'll see you in the next one.